We've all seen movies and shows with medieval sword fighting, men dressed in metal armor using weapons to wallop each other. It happened in real life, sometimes for combat and sometimes for sport. I'm Lexi, and this is Delightfully Different. Sword fighting is still around, and my next guest does just that. It's now a sport with spectators and governing bodies.
Hi, my name is Jake, and I'm a sword fighter.
All right, Jake. And when you say sword fighter, I know you also call yourself a steel fighter or armored combat. What exactly do you do? What do all these things do? Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, sure. So, the colloquialism armored combat, that refers to a sport that is basically a resurrection of medieval tournament combat. There's maybe some urban lore out there that dudes died in tournament fighting all the time, and that's not true. It was basically their UFC or their mixed martial arts, and they had codified rules. There were safety standards and so forth. And so the sport that I participate in seeks to more or less recreate that activity. And so there are two basic competitive formats. There are the group fights, and there are the individual fights, or the single or the dueling formats. And the group fights, those are called melees, and they're broken up into the 5v5 melee, the 10v10 melee, and the 16v16 melee. And it's so many combatants per side, and you win by taking the opposing combatants out of play. You take them out of play by getting them on the ground. You can do that by knockout, knockdown, or submission. So hit them so hard you put them to sleep. Knock them over with a kick, with a punch, with a grappling throw, or do stuff that I like to do, or I just go running around the field like a bat out of hell and ear-holing guys like I'm playing football or lacrosse. And then there's submission, where you hit them so hard they say, "I quit," and they take a knee and put themselves on the ground for you.
Okay.
And gets pretty crazy, gets pretty brutal. And then there's the dueling format, which is much more technical. It's two individual combatants fighting in a 60-second round. And the way you win is by accumulating points. You accumulate points by landing strikes on target areas with your weapon. And there are 4 weapon formats. There's longsword, which is a 2-handed 4-foot sword. We're all familiar with it. It's very knightly. It's very iconic. Yeah. And the next one is polearm. So think of like a poleaxe or a spear or a bardiche, a halberd. And the next one is sword and shield, again, very explanatory. And the final one is sword and buckler. And the sword and buckler category is a little bit different. A buckler is basically a shield the size of a dinner plate. And that one, it's actually you win by scoring 5 hits on your opponent before they score 5 hits on you. And it's best of 3 rounds. And but yeah, they'll do timed rounds, and you accumulate points, and whoever accumulates the most points after 2 rounds wins the fight.
And now all the videos I saw of you were doing the one-on-one. I didn't see any group ones. Is that what you mainly do, is the one-on-one stuff?
Yeah. I've been shifting over about the last 18 months towards single combat. Just because, the melees don't hold a lot for me. It's basically like I'm going to hold an axe, or I'm going to hold something, and then I'm going to do judo. Basically, the armor has gotten really good that it's hard to pain people out. We've gotten really good at padding our helmets. So, rattling somebody's cage, that's pretty hard to do too. So everybody is continuously moving more and more towards grappling. So it's like, I'm going to have a medieval weapon, and then I'm going to not use it. And that's not very much fun. And it's like, if I want to do judo, I'll just go do judo, So it just doesn't hold as much for me. I still do it for funsies, but the ones that I'm really serious about are dueling categories.
And I don't want anybody that's listening to think that this is anything like fencing, because this is not fencing. Mm-hmm. It's a completely different sport. You are wearing a full-on metal armor when you're doing this.
Yes, ma'am.
How heavy is the suit of armor that you're wearing?
So my kit runs something of the tune about 55, 60 pounds when all said and done. Which is about right for the time. Our ancestors were a little shorter and a little smaller than we are. I think probably just didn't get as much food during their growing years, but suffice it to say they were smaller, but the armor was thicker. So you end up with basically the same volume of steel. Like our steel is a lot stronger, so we can make it thinner, but we're taller and longer and broader. So it ends up being basically the same aggregate amount of metal covering you up.
And then how heavy are the swords that you're fighting with? Or weapons in general?
Yeah. So you went and lurked on my profile. So I use Japanese stuff. I'm looking at My dueling swords are about 3.5 pounds, and then my dueling pole arms are between probably 4 pounds, 4 and 7 pounds. I think I've got a max weight that's about seven, that's 6.5 or 7 pounds. Okay. The other one's 4 pounds, which is the minimum.
And the suits are historically accurate for the most part. Now you're kind of basing all of this on history. Are they historically accurate compared to what? I mean, obviously you're taller now than as you said that the people were back then, but you're trying to make them as historically accurate as possible.
Yeah, up to a point. This is there is a certain minimum threshold of historical accuracy that our armor has to follow, and there's even an entity called the Authenticity Committee. We all hate them because they pick stupid hills to die on.
Okay.
Don't get me started, but yes, there is. Let me tell you why I'm hemming and hawing. Like in Europe, they actually have reenactment festivals, and like if you have a belt that's 2 millimeters too wide, don't show up because you will be pilloried for that. They take it extraordinarily seriously. You know, they're very loyal to extant source material on everything, right down to your shoes. And we're not and full contact armored combat. There's recognition that it is a sport, and so we do sportify the armor a little bit. So you know, all the armor looks more or less like stuff that's sitting in museums or extant artwork.
Yeah.
But it's not quite to the same extent that you might see a European reenactment festival. So yes, it's more like analogous rather than historically accurate.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. And you use a Japanese sword. You have your weapons are Japanese, but your suit of armor is not.
It is.
Oh, it's actually very all Japanese. It's all based on Japanese. And is that just you, or can the folks that are participating choose which nation they want to base their suit of armor and their weapons on?
Yeah. So the way that authenticity rule works is you pick a region, and you just have to document the armor within no earlier than I think 1200 to 1600. I think that's the range. And then so I'll pick say England, my region will be like England, the English Isles, and 1445. And then I've got 25 years on either side of that date. And if I can document it all together with historical sources, then I'm good to go. So I went with 1400s Japan. And so, yeah, and I'm one of the very few people that uses Japanese armor. Pretty much everybody's going with Western European armor with some smatterings of Eastern European armor, but I'm kind of a lone wolf. I think there's maybe 3 people in the world that actually use Japanese armor.
Okay. And where do you get these suits of armor, and where do you purchase the weapons? And I understand you also make some of the stuff.
Yeah. So there's existed some sort of medieval recreation or reenactment industry for a long time. A lot of this stuff started popping up in the 60s all over the West. It's really weird. It started in the United States about the 60s, and then again in England and France and so forth, and Western Europe, pretty much the 1960s. And that gave rise to vendor companies, guys that would produce either armor or produce clothing, produce stuff that was serving the reenactment community and that industry. And so when this sport started becoming more popular, all the armorers that already existed, they just shifted to making sport optimized armor out of, stronger, lighter materials and so forth. So there's reputable vendors where they have well-built websites and they give you production timelines, or if they have it in stock and you can buy it. I don't believe in buying stuff if I can make it. So I actually build all my own stuff. And yeah, so I buy the steel. I buy a high alloy steel called 4130 chromoly, and I forge it into the armor shape and then heat treat it like you see in the movies where they heat it up. And then, the blacksmith will heat the sword up and then quench it in water or whatever. I do that with my armor, which makes it extraordinarily strong, but I keep the weight down, and do the same thing with my swords. I don't bother with purchasing almost any of my armor.
Really? And you make the swords as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And do you sell them too, or do you just purchase, or you make them for yourself to fight with?
Yeah. So I've done armor commissions in the past. I even did a sword commission, but I've kind of gotten away from that. Just armor and sword production. It's really hard on your body. A lot of repetitive stress injuries and stuff, and I don't like it. So basically, I just build for me now and maybe close friends if I feel like it.
Gotcha. And now this is like a worldwide thing. This is not just something that happens in the United States. Is this everybody takes part in this? And is there like a governing body?
Yeah, so there are two existing international governing bodies. There's the International Medieval Combat Federation, which was formed in 2014,
Okay.
and the original organization was called Historical Medieval Battles International Association, very clumsily named, and I think at its height there were like 35 member countries. They used the International Olympic Committee model, where every member nation has a representative entity. So in the United States, it was called the Armored Combat League, and they would host a tryout every year to make the team, be selected for the team, and then go compete at the World Championships. I think that dissolved because it was largely funded by a Russian oligarch, and then the war broke out, so it doesn't exist. And now something called it's called Buhurt International. So the historical term for our sport is called Buhurt. It means, it's like old German. It means to wallop.
Okay.
I think that's how it translates. Yeah. To hit or to wallop. And so the other organization is called Buhurt International. I think they use an international club model where there's standards for your tournament to be recognized. And if it's recognized, everybody that competes is awarded points. The more points you accumulate throughout the year, that determines how you seed at the World Cup. And it's a worldwide open, so they could have theoretically 200 teams register at their World Cup, and based on your points, that puts you in the standings. And the more you win at the World Championships, that's your final points. And I think this is how it works. I might be wrong. And whoever accumulates the most points by the end of the season, those are the world champions, I think. Don't quote me on that. And then the International Medieval Combat Federation has, I think, 35 member nations, something like that. It kind of vacillates year to year. And they use the Olympic model. So there's a team selection process from every country. Then you make the representative team. You compete in one big tournament, which I'm actually about to go to in 3 weeks in Mexico. It's being held in Mexico this year.
Oh, okay.
And basically, it's a tournament format with each country with each team representing their country, and whoever comes out the top of that tournament, that one tournament wins the world title. So
you're on a team then. What is your team called?
So, well, I'm just on Team USA, but I'm the representative for the polearm category. I won polearm I took first in polearm at the qualifier, so I'm one of the polearm representatives, and I took third in the longsword category. So I'm praying that one guy can't afford to go, ends up having to back out, so I'll be able to get a spot. I'm the standby.
So, like, you had to make Team USA then. So you're one of the best in the United States. You're one of the best.
Sure. On that day okay, in that category. Sure.
Who judges when you guys are doing these tournaments? Who are the judges?
So yeah, we have what are called line judges, and it's just volunteers from the community that are trained to do it. And there's no money in this. The consumer base is not willing to pay to watch this for the most part. So there's definitely a labor of love involved in it, and which is fine. I have no problem with that. And we stand in a square enclosure. The historical term for which is called the list. If you ever saw like A Knight's Tale. With Heath Ledger. Did you ever see that movie?
I know what you're talking about. I don't think I ever saw it though.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, they used to talk about, well, I'll see you in the list, and that's the term for the fighting arena.
Okay.
So they'll have line judges that stand at every corner of the fighting arena, and they have a little clicker. So every time they click it, it racks up a tally. And basically they'll be like at each corner, those two corners will be judging one fighter, and the other two corners will be judging the other fighter. And so they can get a pretty accurate idea of how many accurate hits were landed. And then they'll compare notes and they get the average. So like, these two guys will rack up, we'll see. Well, I saw 10 hits. And then the other guy says, well, I saw 8. Okay. The average of that is 9. And then these two guys will say, okay, I saw 11 and I saw 9. And they'll be like, okay, the average of that is 10. So that round goes to fighter A rather than fighter B. So that's how they judge the duels.
Okay. Okay. And how do they pick who you're going to fight? Is it like NCAA tournament style where they match you up with somebody and you whittle it down to the last ones?
Yeah. It's usually tournament bracket format, depending on, there's a couple of determining factors with certain things. First of all is aggregate participation. How many people are there, so it might be a round robin. It might be a double elimination bracket. It might be a single elimination bracket. And that'll be determined by a combination of how many participants do we have at this tournament, and also what are our time constraints for the site that we're renting,
Right.
So you might get stuck in a single elimination tournament because there's, 40 people in your category, and, you got one day to get it all done.
Gotcha.
So don't lose.
How did you get into this in the first place? When did you start doing this?
Really, this goes back to when I was a kid with, using foam, duct tape, PVC swords in the backyard. When I was a teenager, I didn't have a successful high school career. Yeah. So that was the thing. And then it upgraded a little bit to just a medieval fighting society called the Belagarth Medieval Combat Reenactment Society. And it's, they have chapters all over the country, and it's Boffer fighting, and it's well organized, and they have like week-long camp out events and stuff. And, and then I was in college like 10 years ago, and one of my buddies that I met, we were doing some Belagarth together, and then his cousin was like, no, you got to come to San Jose with me to do this thing. And it was a small tournament this was in the very, very early days of our sport in the United States. Okay. And he went and, borrowed armor, fought, and he's like, this is awesome. And he calls me, he's like, dude. And I'm like, okay, well, let me try it. And I tried on some armor and gave it a go, and been doing it for 10 years now. So it's just by word of mouth.
And I understand you're one of the founding members of the local, do you call it a league?
Yeah, the local club. It's basically a club model these days. Yeah, the primary club in northern Utah is called the Salt Lake City Crusaders, and I'm one of the people that founded it.
Okay. And do you guys have alter egos, or do you go by your own name and personality?
No alter egos. We're not role playing or anything. We're just nerds that like to hit each other.
Okay. How often do you practice this? How often do you practice to make this, to become successful at this?
So our current circumstances allow for two practice blocks a week. One of them is on Wednesday, and the other we do Saturday morning. And we right now the Crusaders are they're at a location in Springville. So the drive is brutal. Yeah. At least for me. And luckily it's it's an indoor spot that we got a good deal on for a lease. And so we set up our list permanently with rubber mats on the floor, and have 3-hour-long training sessions at a time. To be really good at this, the guys that are at the top, they're very fortunate to have like basically a proper gym, and they're training 4 and 5 days a week. And the really serious guys that are better than me anyway, that's kind of what they're doing. But yeah, you need multiple practice nights a week if you want to get good at this. Special
workouts in between the practices in order to, it seems like you got to be in pretty good shape to do this, especially wearing 50 plus pounds of armor.
Yeah. So the correct answer is yes. Successful people work out in between, training sessions and sparring sessions. I don't, because I'm lazy and I lack discipline, but I've been doing this so long, I kind of get away with it. It's the armor's very, very familiar, and I know how to move very efficiently. So I can kind of get away with not conditioning. Okay. Until I can't. But the truth is, yes, you do have to be in good shape. If you're 30, 40 pounds overweight, you should probably fix that if you want to be good at this. And, I'm lucky to always be at least skinny fat at worst. So I can kind of get away with being lazy in my training regimen.
I'm Lexi, and this is Delightfully Different. I'm talking with Jake, a sword fighter.
Have you ever gotten hurt doing this, and do people get hurt in general?
I've been pretty lucky. I've had a broken pinky. I can't fully extend anymore because I broke my pinky, and then I didn't go to the doctor. I just duct taped it together until it healed, and just healed wrong. Like for comparison, right? So that's like that now. And then last year, I got hit in the back just right, and it partially dislocated a rib, but it popped back in on its own. So I was, it hurt for a couple of weeks, but I was okay. More serious injuries, they're actually pretty uncommon. We've got about 10 years of insurance data now, so that allows liability providers to feel a little more comfortable with us. Right. And so the premiums aren't as bad as they used to be. Woof. But, in the earlier days when we hadn't quite figured out good anti-concussion padding systems, concussions were a little more common.
Okay.
Guys getting, they get hit and they're gone,
Right.
But mostly you see football injuries, so dislocated shoulders and, knee injuries, ligament injuries, that sort of thing. That's really what you see. But every once in a while you get something pretty gnarly. A couple years ago, I broke a bunch of dudes' ribs. In fact, actually at the qualifier in the melees, I hit a guy right on the front and he's like, yeah, I felt like 3 ribs crack when you did that. And then I love it, but he was cool about it. He was very gracious. But I mean, really serious, like hospital-inducing injuries are fairly rare, actually, because we just the safety requirements are so stringent. You'd think that otherwise we're really hitting each other hard, but it's mostly the same stuff you see in football, snowboarding, jiu-jitsu, with torn ligaments and separations and things.
Well, you're wearing more protective gear than any of those people are.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And do you have to have does your organization have special insurance? Like you mentioned the insurance, and I used to like roller derby, and we had to have special insurance as well for our organization in case somebody got hurt.
Yeah. So liability insurance for what we're doing is kind of a requirement. You really got to do something like that. So in some of the places where people have actually stood up gyms, successful armored combat gyms, they get a liability policy, I assume, for their site. It's more like site insurance.
Okay.
We luckily right now the entity to the International Medieval Combat Federation, it's called the American AMCF American Medieval Combat Federation. So it's almost the same acronym.
Right.
They just have a league-wide insurance policy, liability policy that any club can get access to if they want to. It's like $20 for your annual premium per member. But yeah, have liability insurance. There's layers of paperwork with things like assumption of risk forms and waivers and things that people sign. So like if somebody does file, nobody's done this, but if somebody does file a civil suit getting hurt, it's like, it says here, you knew what you're getting into. What are you doing? But if if I hurt you in a fight, you file a civil suit, I lose, you win, there's a liability policy that protects me up to a certain amount of money.
Gotcha.
And which everybody has and takes very seriously.
Okay. And I know you because you have a horse. Do you plan on ever using Duke, your horse, and maybe moving on to jousting?
No, I have no intention of jousting.
Okay.
I just had no interest in it. I know Duke wouldn't be a good fit for it just because he's so small. Like a shorter horse in jousting, I understand, is actually a competitive advantage because you're kind of pushing up and it can unseat the other rider and maybe knock him off and you're awarded more points. But Duke, he's got such a slender built, gracile build. If I got hit, it'd probably injure his back. So
right.
You'd want like something drafty but still short.
And I see some of the folks that do this will do it for entertainment purposes as well. They're for hire for parties and events. Do you do that as well?
Yeah, the Crusaders are very prolific in the Salt Lake Valley for doing entertainment contracts. We do a lot of the Renaissance fairs around here, and largely, we connect with Renaissance fairs, and we'll actually piggyback that sometimes for competitions. So we don't have to. Right. We don't have to worry about paying for a site or anything, and we've got a free audience, and they pay us to be there. So it absorbs it absorbs all of our costs, and we got a captive audience. So we'll do that very often. Yeah.
And it looks like when I was going through everything, it looks like it's mostly men that are doing this. Are there any women that partake in this sport as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a whole female side of the house with women's brackets at the tournaments and stuff. It is largely predominantly male, just because only guys are dumb enough to hit each other in the head with metal objects for the most part. And decide that that's a good time. But yeah, they're at the most recent event called Carolina Carnage. It was in February. I don't know how many women's teams there were, but it was I think it was like 70 or 80 women were there.
Oh, okay.
A couple hundred male athletes. It is a bit male dominated, but women do it, and all the governing entities work very hard to make sure that there's a space for them.
Awesome. And
yep.
I know it's fighting and it's a sport, but is it also a lifestyle? Does this like take up a lot of your free time in your life?
hmm
It does.
Yeah, and it takes up a lot of money. It's not cheap. I'm so fortunate that I can build my stuff that mitigates a lot of my costs. But yeah, it's to be very active and competitive. You need a good probably $5,000+ a year in fund money.
Okay.
Yeah, it's maybe not quite as bad as owning a horse, but it's close. Uh, yeah, and yeah, it's there. There are a lot of people that I know that like this is their thing. They go to work and then they take care of any home responsibilities with family, and then they're in the gym or they're and they're traveling around to tournaments and stuff. It can very much become a way of life.
How much money do you think you've spent since you've started, like from the beginning on this hobby and sport?
I don't want to know. Into the tens of thousands, probably. 10 years. Yeah, I mean, if somebody told me $35,000 over 10 years, I'd probably believe it.
Okay. All right. What's the furthest you've traveled in order to do this?
I think Poland.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That is really far. How often are you going overseas in order to do this?
At best once a year. It's international travel ain't cheap, so at best once a year.
Right. And also you have to take all that stuff on an airplane with you. How does that work?
It's not as bad as you'd think.
Okay.
Like the armor, you just put it in a rolling duffel bag and the bag can't weigh more than 50 pounds or you're paying out the nose. And again, I'm lucky. I'm only 6'1" and like 190 pounds. So it's easy to make that happen. A lot of my friends they're just these huge, they're troglodytes. They're massive. 6'6" and 280. And I'm like, good luck with moving your kid around. But yeah, you just put everything in rolling duffel bags and ski bags. And the IMCF I know like does an invitation, puts out like a tournament invitation PDF. They just print off and you put in your gear bag. That way, if TSA goes through it, this is sporting equipment, not weapons.
Okay.
So it's
there are swords.
Yeah, they're swords, but they're blunt. Yeah, okay. I got a ski bag full of swords. Like anything sharp or dangerous, I'm like, well, they're blunted, so no. Sports equipment. That's what I tell them every time.
What is the end goal with this? Like, what's the highest honor in doing this? What's the best you could possibly do?
I think being awarded a world championship. That's it. I've come close a couple times. I've silvered twice, and anyway. I keep missing years that we win, and it bugged me. But yeah, I think that's it, is winning a world championship. It's certainly not as easy as it used to be. So that honor continues to, that achievement continues to gain more respect and honor.
Is that your ultimate personal goal as well?
Sure.
Is that what you want to do before it all be a stop?
Yeah, in fact, I was preparing to retire about this time last year. I'd made the team to go to Spain, which is where the IMCF World Championships were last year. And I was like, I'm just going to go. And if I win a gold medal, I think I'll hang up my hat and be done. It's hard on your body. It's hard on your wallet. And I was like, I think I've had my fill. And then I had to back out because I own a horse and it's too expensive. And so I was like, okay, one more year and we'll see. So if I win a title this year, then I may or may not hang up my hat and be done.
I gotcha. I feel you. You called it Boohurst. Am I saying that right? Boohurst?
Boohurt. So
Boohurt.
Yep.
Is there other fun jargon besides Boohurt that you guys use?
Let me think.
Words that average Joe wouldn't probably know.
Sure. Yeah, like we'll call sword and buckler sword and buck. We'll call sword and shield sword and board. Pole arm, we'll call it pole. We used to call melees fat guy bumper cars. Just because it was the demographic of people that got into it. There's something called the Society for Creative Anachronisms, which is really the first like medieval recreation thing that's what started in the 60s. And basically everything that you see from live action role plays to other reenactment societies are branches are in some way or another find their roots in the SCA. And so a lot of SCA guys were the ones that actually started armored combat or Boohurt in the United States. And they were over 40 and they were fat and they couldn't grapple. So it's just fat dudes hugging each other. And, it wasn't that impressive. It didn't look that cool. We thought it was awesome. It wasn't. We called it fat guy bumper cars.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll nickname throws. So we use a lot of judo in melees because it translates really effectively. or it can if you do it right. So like there's a variant of a throw called the Osoto Gari. We call it Osotos. We have a throw that when a guy, his back is on the list railing, his hips can kind of be exposed for you to get your hips behind him and break his posture and throw him. So we call it the hump and dump. As you get up against the fence next to him and you rotate your hips forward to get behind his, like a hump. So we call it the hump and dump.
Okay.
So there's some stuff like that. Yeah. Another one we call, for guys in the duels that just throw a lot of strikes, they machine gun them. We call those guys spammers. We call them spam fighters. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that I can summon to memory. That's what I can think of off the top of my head.
What does your family think of what you do, of your hobby, and do they come see you?
Not usually. They've come to a couple of Renaissance fairs to watch a couple of things. When I very first started, they thought I was crazy and tried to talk me out of it. And I was like, no, I don't listen to you guys anyway. You think I'm going to listen to you now? But now they appreciate it. My sister actually helped with some of the construction of my armor. And like the hard layer, or the primary layer of armor, I built all that. But your secondary layer, which is the padding, that also has to be historical. Yeah. And so my sister's a very talented, very accomplished seamstress, and she actually went to the D23 cosplay contest as Cinderella. Got accepted into it, made her own dress, made her own petticoats and stuff. It's excellent work. And so she figured out how to recreate this lost art of making the armor padding. It's a quilted jacket that doesn't stretch because it's quilted and it's made of natural fibers, but it still has to allow for full mobility. It can't restrict you. And she figured out how to reconstruct that just based on looking at extant examples that have survived. And, I wear it and everybody's like, where'd you get that? And my sister, she's like, what does she cost? And I say, you can't afford her because she doesn't want to do it again. It's really hard. But yes, my sister helps me with it a bit. All
in the family then. What draws you to this? Is this, I feel like you're out living out like a childhood fantasy. Do you think you are?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, I always enjoyed sports. Like my mom was a sports nut for the longest time, watched everything but like golf, watched tennis and all the college sports, all the professional sports and everything. And so that sort of competitive drive was inculcated in me, but just not very athletic in the way that I wanted to be. And then I found, Boffer sword fighting. I'm like, boy, wouldn't it be cool if this was like an Olympic sport? And it never will be. But, this being turned into something that is patterned after the Olympic model, and it's competitive and it's organized like competitive sword fighting. A bunch of my friends have been on TV with History Channel's Night Fight. I got invited on, but I couldn't get away from work. I had to quit my job to do it. So it kind of is, like I remember watching The Lord of the Rings and I saw the scene where they're reforging the sword that Viggo Mortensen uses in the third movie. And I was like, and it grabbed me. I was 15 years old, and that possessed me. I'm like, I have to do that one day. I have to forge a sword. And now I built my own forge. I built my own forges and stuff, and built my own anvil stand. I have a bunch of custom hammers, and I forge swords and I forge armor, and gallivant around the country and the world, in the stuff that I've built myself and fight. And it's great.
That's awesome. I love that. Do you have advice for anybody that wants to get involved in this, or any like a heads up you want to give anybody if they're thinking, I want to do this?
Yeah. My first thought is, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. The armor is really hot. It's heavy. And so you just got to be able to be okay with the thought that you're going to be a little uncomfortable. And if that doesn't displace you, you'll be fine. You're going to be just fine. And it's good to do things that challenge you. So if you're a little intimidated, maybe you ought to do it, because it's good to do things that are hard. It's good to do hard things. And armored combat is very hard. Awesome. But it's also very rewarding. It gives back.
Okay. And I saw there's an event in Salt Lake City this weekend at the Expo Center. Are you participating in that event?
Yes. Yeah. I'll be fighting with the Salt Lake City Crusaders at FitCon this weekend. And then there'll be another team from Salt Lake. I think they're called the Order of the Silver Rose. And they're just an offshoot of the Crusaders. We got too big, so we had to make more teams. Okay. Just too many of us. And not a big deal. It's just what be. But and there will be, I think, 8 or 9 teams coming from around the Intermountain West and the Midwest to join us for a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I hope you have fun this weekend, and I hope you kick ass next. Is it next month you go to Mexico to compete?
Yeah. Beginning of May. I got about 3 weeks till I fly out.
All right. Well, good luck with all that. I hope you win.
Thank you.
And thank you for doing this. I'm sure I'll see you
course.
again at the stables.
Yeah, look forward to it.
You can watch videos of Jake sword fighting on the links posted with this podcast. And you can watch Jake and Team USA fight at the IMFC World Championships in Mexico on their YouTube page when it happens in May. Thanks for joining me this week on Delightfully Different. Coming up next week, I talk with a voodoo lady in New Orleans. If you or someone you know lives life differently, I'd love an interview. Email me, lexiontheradio@gmail.com. That's LEXI on the radio@gmail.com, or go to delightfullydifferentpodcast.com and have a delightful week.